Ladies and large numbers of gentlemen, welcome. I'm Roddy Gow. I'm the founder of the Asia-Scotland Institute, and I'm enormously grateful to Paul Little and the college for enabling us to have this discussion here. It could hardly be more timely, with all the talk resulting from Donald Trump's global trade tariffs, which are causing extraordinary polarization, I suspect to the advantage of China, and of course, adding to the threats in the South China Seas and elsewhere to the freedom of shipping to move around the world. A maritime trade on which we are hugely dependent for all the foodstuffs and things that come to this country, something that many people going to supermarkets are not aware of. And to those of you that are here, training to be merchant mariners or training the merchant mariners, you know how important that is. So I'd like to say how grateful the Asia-Scotland Institute is to Paul Little, who, as you probably know, is a captain in the Royal Navy Reserve, I think, is that right? And he has plenty of things to talk about. And I'm going to ask him if he could very kindly introduce Lord George Robertson, who's fresh off all the work that he's been doing with the government in their defence review. That's not something he intends to talk about, although there may be some side references talking about what are the threats and what are our capabilities and what do we need to do to meet them. Last night we had an event in Edinburgh where Sir Malcolm Rifkin was looking at similar issues, and that was also very interesting, and we were able to say we were coming here. So Paul, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. When Roddy and I were talking about probably nearly 2 years ago, certainly a year ago, this was to be an event about the challenges in the Red Sea. But actually, such is the world that it's become much wider than that. So that just shows you the pace of change, if nothing else. So I've got a set speech, and I intend to keep that set speech, because if I don't keep that set speech by about 6 o'clock tonight, you'll all be looking for your train, and we've got our next speakers, and the more important speaker is coming up next, Lord Robertson. So good morning, Lord Robertson. I'm absolutely delighted to see you here. I have failed miserably over the last decade to get you here. So we're delighted you're finally here. Distinguished speakers, distinguished guests, colleagues, and our cadets. And also we've got some students from St Andrews and other institutions. You're also very welcome here today. So look, I'm delighted to welcome you to the City of Glasgow College. This is one of 2 sites that we have. We used to have about 11 in Glasgow, and we consolidated in 2015 and 2016 to simply 2 sites. One of them is on this site this is about, this room, which is literally on the Clyde, is nowadays about £10 million investment in seamanship. And the other building that you were in having your coffee is about £100 million investment in maritime education and training. And there are 230 nautical colleges in the world, and this is simply the best. Not because we're here, it's because we know who they all are, and we keep an eye on who they all are. And quite honestly, there are 229 that often follow what we do. So we have to also keep one step ahead of what we do. So look, as a world-renowned tertiary institution, supporting over 200 industry sectors, what's our unique contribution to maritime security? We've got a world-class reputation for nearly half a century or more in maritime education and training. And for example, on our other site, we've had 172 years of illustrious education training in general, including one of our former alumni, Charles Reaney McIntosh. But we have many distinguished ships captains that have come through, and superintendents and actually ship owners from this. So what's our particular aspect of that? Well, I think it's really 3 things. I think it's first of all to promote scholarship in a growing issue. It's to convene great minds, diverse viewpoints, and equally to inspire the next generation of maritime leaders. And it's also, and this is a longitudinal task we have, to support allied navies, governments and politicians to better understand the maritime world, to better understand that beyond the echo chambers that they normally inhabit, be they in the Ministry of Defence, Strategic Command or NATO, there are other viewpoints and there are evolving viewpoints. And I think today we will add to those viewpoints. So look, we're particularly interested to look at this topic of threats of maritime trade and the global economy. And we actually are delighted that we're doing that with Roddy. Thank you very much, Roddy. You are a great friend and supporter of this institution for many years. And we're delighted that we have finally got this particular seminar off the ground. We have many other ones. It's a distinct pleasure to welcome Lord Robertson. I'll formally introduce him at the end. We've also got other great keynote and panelists here today. So I think what you're going to see and hear are some insights. Some of those I think will be cutting edge. And I wouldn't underestimate cutting edge. I'm literally just back a couple of weeks from the United States. And another one of those 230 maritime colleges is the best in America. It's the State University of New York. And it's the biggest and the best of the 6 maritime academies in America. And they've just got a new admiral, and we were just kind of affirming our particular links. But it's never ceased to amaze me that here in Glasgow, we have got technology that is simply a decade ahead of the very best in America. Now, we didn't go to the War College and we didn't go to the US Naval Academy, although I've been to that academy and the Coast Guard Academy in a previous generation. And they do not have the cutting edge technology that we have. So what you're hearing today is cutting edge thinking. You can see cutting edge technology, but don't underestimate the importance of cutting edge thinking. You've heard it here first. It's shaping your thinking, and your thinking could indeed shape the thinking of others. We've also got a panel coming up after the keynote from Lord Robertson on geopolitics, security, and strategic vulnerabilities in the maritime domain. And unfortunately, Dr. Holland from the US Naval War College is ill, can't be with us today, but we're equally delighted that Professor Basil Germond, the Chair of the International Security in Lancaster University, is here today. And he'll be joined by our Dean of Faculty, Chris Keenan, who also spoke at the First Sea Lords conference last year. So a very good panel. Hopefully you'll give them some very good questions. Second panel will focus on the industry's resilience, its innovation in the face of all this maritime disruption. And we're particularly delighted that we've got Philip Fullerton, Managing Director of Northern Marine, also a much valued partner of the City of Glasgow College, and our new friend, Professor Ian Gow, himself ex-Royal Navy, Chairman of the Japan Society of Scotland, and Honorary Professor of Japanese at the University of Edinburgh. Delightful to see you here. Look, timing is everything, delegates, and here we are, as Roddy has alluded to the tumult, the growing tumult. I think language is important. Not growing problems, it's a growing tumult. In fact, I would go as far as to say what we're facing in this maritime security world is a polycrisis. So what we're looking for as academics, even as the, if you like, lecturers and leaders of the next generation of seafarers, we're looking for a corresponding sense of urgency to find some practical solutions to this growing tumult. We're looking for some innovative solutions, and we want those now. We don't want those next year. Now, that's quite a bold statement to make. So let me say it in plain speak. Far too often, we simply admire the problems. We talk about them from all sorts of dimensions, but we're not doubling down on seeking workable solutions. Notice I didn't say perfect solutions. Give me a solution that's 60% there at a time of crisis any day. But don't wait till you have that perfect solution, because you're kicking the can down the road. I think we're now seeing the challenge of that. And that's a a particular important for Glasgow. Glasgow has a 400-year history in maritime global trade, crisscrossing the world. I used to be the president during COP26, actually, in the pandemic, of the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce. And I had a pendant on it. And the pendant had a stork. And I remember asking the chief executive, so what's the significance of the pendant? He says, I don't know, I'll have to look it up. No one had ever asked that question. And they discovered that it was the Chinese symbol of trade. So the Chamber of Commerce in Glasgow was set up after the War of Independence to really find new markets for the merchants in Glasgow, and some of those new markets were in Asia. So Glasgow has been crisscrossing east and west for 400 years, and many of our lecturers and many of our SJETs, many of our managers are the next generation of Glaswegians helping to prepare for the next 400 years of that trade. And what are they facing? Well, they're facing a world where we've got sea denial and no longer open oceans. We're facing a world where the 21st century has got a new form of piracy. We've got new forms of terrorism. Illegal fishing is now a massive billion-pound industry. We've got, of course, those pernicious cyber attacks. And maritime trade is actually at the mercy of a number of choke points around the world. I mentioned about the Red Sea simply being one. Roddy has alluded to the tariffs. They are certainly not making them any easier. And if you lump into that the ongoing war in Ukraine and between Russia and Ukraine, and then you look at the conflagration between Israel and Palestine and what's happening there, you could be forgiven to say, you know, the world's in a mess. But your bandwidth should also extend to the conflicts that are ongoing that we don't know, that don't go to our news feeds. You know, we should actually have sufficient bandwidth to look at what's happening in Africa, look at what's happening elsewhere in the States, where there are multiple wars going on, where there are multiple devastation going on. And simply because we don't hear about them doesn't mean that we can ignore them. Now, in about a week or two, I'll be donning the uniform to help mark VE Day. It's hard to believe that that's 80 years ago. And what lessons have we learnt in those 80 years? You know, we would argue there's been a lot of slow learning going on. So we need to pick up that pace to do that. And today will help us. Today will allow us an opportunity for scholarship, for thought leadership. Because as an island nation, as a tertiary institution that's training the very best in the world for the world, we have real skin in this particular game. So most of you will know that we do merchant navy training. You might not know that we now train about over 40% of all the United Kingdom's merchant navy cadets. It used to be a third. It will be over half shortly. You might not know that we also train Royal Navy cadets, particularly in marine engineering here. Such is the growing reputation of this college. But regardless of that, we try to inculcate to those cadets that they're part of a history. And almost their first lecture is actually a parade. When the first years come in, literally, they are marched up to George Square. Their uniforms barely fit them. Sometimes they're the wrong way round. Sometimes someone's in a jumper and someone's in a shirt and someone's in a tunic. But somehow, by the time they get to George Square, they look the part. And we do that intentionally because we're trying to remind those young cadets that they're part of a very distinguished, long history of being in the Navy and the Merchant Navy in particular. And we do that very publicly because as those names are read out, perhaps they don't do it, but our lecturers do it, and I do it. I silently reflect on, in somber silence, of the individual legacy that once cadet that passed through our predecessor institutions, the hopes and ambitions that they had, were no longer there. But they paid that sacrifice for global trade. They paid that sacrifice for the common man and for each other. And here we have the next generation. Some 4,000 international students come to this college. Many of those are in maritime. And we're preparing them for a volatile world, a complex world, an uncertain world, and an ambiguous world. And on this site, we do that with events today. We've got lecturers and senior lecturers and senior academics in here who will be inspired by what our speakers here today, and they will inspire you at the coffee breaks and if you get a chance to go on the tour. This is part of 3 classrooms on this particular site. And in these classrooms and about the 120 on the building adjacent to that, or the 2 buildings, engineering and the nautical science tower, we're supporting STEM, maritime education training, but we're also supporting the primes here in Glasgow and elsewhere. BAE, Babcock, Thales, many more. And they depend on us. And it's no coincidence that I often shock people by saying UK shipping and UK shipbuilding could not exist nowadays without City Glasgow College. And everyone going, what a claim is that? Well, if you train half of all the kind of merchant navy cadets in the UK shipping, and if you stop that, that's a massive puncture in that. If 80% of naval shipbuilding happens in Glasgow or over in the east in Rosyth, and this is a centre of excellence in shipbuilding, I myself actually chaired a UK task force to prepare the next generation for 30 years of shipbuilders, shipwrights in that regard. If this college isn't doing that, there is no college in the UK doing that. That's the challenge. That's the challenge we face. So today, as we reflect on these topics, what I would ask you to do is to engage. I would ask you to challenge the speakers as much as you're challenged, to open yourself to the thinking that they have themselves been open to, because that's actually part of our mission to let learning flourish. And we did that during COP26. In this room, and in this room I was sitting in there and we were talking about the decarbonisation and the importance of green hydrogen. To be honest, I didn't know much about green hydrogen. I became an expert when I walked out that door because the world's experts in green hydrogen all were at that particular seminar. And there were 10 of those seminars happening every single day on this site for 10 days. And the world's shipping ministers and the International Maritime Organization, i.e. the UN's Maritime Organization, spent that time at this college. So the Clyde Corridor was conceived, if not in this room, on the other block. The plan they have for the decarbonisation of the world fleet happened at this college. So look, there are many things that can happen at events, and I hope today, as you leave, you'll start to see that. Roddy was just asking me recently about our Queen's Anniversary Award. Queen's Anniversary Award is the award given to the top university or college in the United Kingdom. It's given every 2 years. And just in last February past, the Queen presented myself and the chair of the college with this distinguished award for being the top tertiary institution in the United Kingdom. So there we were, alongside, sitting shoulder to shoulder with the principal of Oxford University, with the principal of Glasgow University. I don't think the principal of Lancaster was there, Basil, in that day, but he probably could have been in that regard. So there they were. Only 20 institutions every 2 years get that. Now, significantly for us, this college got it for applied research. Not for teaching, not for thought leadership, but for research. And that research was for oxygen depletion in enclosed spaces on our ships. And that research is already saving lives and has been enshrined as part of the IMO's safety codes. So there's another example of how in the institution that we're having this event, here in Glasgow, we're having a world-class, world-beaten reputation for maritime. We want to extend that now to maritime security. So I want to announce today that we'll be making this an annual event. So if you don't get a chance to speak this year, I hope that you'll get a chance to speak in coming years. So thank you for that. I'm now going to formally introduce Lord Robertson. I'll just pause at that point. You know, it's in that spirit of having great keynote speakers that we're looking for someone to embody the values of leadership, of great strategy, of grand strategy, and of global impact. So it is a distinct honour for me to introduce Lord George Robertson of Port Ellen, a statesman, a diplomat, a lifelong advocate of international peace and security, perhaps most importantly in Glasgow, a proud Scot on the world stage, recognised with the Wallace Award and many other awards. Lord Robertson served as the United Kingdom's Secretary of State for Defence from 1997 to 1999, before becoming the 10th Secretary General of NATO, where he led the alliance at hugely grave and important times, leading the alliance in the response to 9/11 and helping to shape NATO's evolution for this 21st century. Now he has received, as a humble and gracious man, he's received some of the highest honours that you can bestow, including the US Presidential Medal of Freedom, and he continues to be an influential policy chair on strategic boards and on councils. Now currently, and very fortunately, he is one of 3 leaders with the very Herculean task of the UK's Defence Review. And it's not published and we're not asking you about that, and I want to stress that again, but we're indebted to you. Our future security and our children's security were in your and your colleagues' hands as you debated and discussed what the United Kingdom and its allies would need in this next part. So you've shown great leadership, exemplary leadership, top leadership to the defence of our nation in a fast-changing world. Delegates, can you please join me in giving a very warm Glasgow welcome to Lord Robertson. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome, Paul, and it's lovely to be here in Glasgow College and the Nautical Centre as well. You get to your stage in life where you get your obituary before you're dead, and so you have to listen to a description of yourself that you don't actually recognise. But it is good to be here in Glasgow today, because I used to, in my international role in NATO, used to tell people about the difference between the New York Mafia and the Glasgow Mafia. And as you know, the New York Mafia make you an offer you can't refuse, whereas the Glasgow Mafia make you an offer you can't understand. And that has always been my hallmark. I think that they always thought, well, if he'd got to that level, then he must know what he was talking about, even although we don't actually know what he's saying. So, as Paul has said, for the last 9 months, 3 of us, myself, General Richard Barons, former one of the military chiefs of this country, and Dr. Fiona Hill, who worked for Donald Trump in his first administration and has written a book about Vladimir Putin. The 3 of us have been externally reviewing for the Strategic Defence Review of 2025. A massive job to look at the whole of Britain's defences and to see how it can be reorganized, re-established in order to deal with the kind of trials and tribulations that we face in the world. Now, I did a review before. As Paul said, I was Defence Secretary of the United Kingdom in 1997. In 1997 and 1998, we did a strategic defence review, which I am told is regarded as being one of the better ones during the years. I used to say that if it was a success, it would be called the SDR 1998. And had it been a failure, it would have been known as the Robertson Review. So I'm looking forward to the SDR 2025 retaining its title as well. But 1998 is just yesterday to a lot of us here, not to the younger generation who probably weren't born at that time. But in 1998, this country had 20,000 troops committed to Northern Ireland. 20,000 troops committed to Northern Ireland. The whole of the British Army now accounts for 72,000 people, but we had 20,000 at that time committed to Northern Ireland. NATO had just signed the NATO-Russia Founding Act with President Yeltsin, and we regarded Russia as being a partner in the future of the world. China was in the shadows, usually hiding behind Russia in the United Nations, and we all believed that globalization was a good idea and was going to produce dividends for all of us. So that world is now gone. It's completely disappeared, and we have to face up to the fact that we live in a very, very different world. And the maritime area is an area where a lot of the germs in the international system have come to light. So we grew used after the end of the Cold War to a series of benign certainties that we had. A famous American academic said it was the end of history. People took the view that we had seen the end of wars and conflicts between nations, and that we were in a much more benign situation whereby globalization and prosperity was going to be spread in terms of the world. Where there were problems, and there were problems in the Balkans, Bosnia and Kosovo, which I was involved in at that time. But then you had 9/11, you had Afghanistan, you had Iraq, you had Libya. But these were short-term interventions where our military were engaged for very specific periods, but they were not involved in peer-to-peer fighting. They were not involved in anything like the kind of conflict that we are at the present moment witnessing in Ukraine with a superpower, a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council attacking and seeking to eliminate one of its neighboring independent nation states. And in 2020, I'm trying to remember when was it? 2002. 2022. I stood with Vladimir Putin on a stage, similar to here today, with Vladimir Putin standing beside me, and I heard him saying, and I've got the transcript of what he said. He said, "Ukraine is a sovereign, independent nation state, and it will make its own decisions about peace and security." And now this man, transformed from being the benign and collaboratory colleague, has turned into this megalomaniac who now says that Ukraine has no right to exist and that he forcibly will now merge it with the Russian Federation. So we had armed forces, whether in the air or on land or at sea, configured for a different era. And what we now have to do is to look very carefully at the prevailing circumstances that apply in the world today and see how they can all be reorganized. Now, I can't tell you what's in the Defence Review. It's been written and it's finalised, and the last words were still being written. Yesterday, the Prime Minister has endorsed it and its recommendations, and in a couple of weeks' time, it will be announced to the world. So I'm not, there are people who will try to pick up from what I say some of the elements that are in it, but I can't trespass on that particular territory. But I can tell you what the background is that we've had to look at, especially in the maritime area. But maybe I could just at the beginning tell you how we did the review, so that when it comes out and you read it, and I'm sure you will all read it word for word. It's 150 pages. You'll see that this is not simply three people putting their heads together, looking at the world today, and then drawing up some blueprint for the future. The three reviewers appointed a team of 6 experts to help us. We picked a NATO expert, one of the Assistant Secretaries General of NATO. We picked a tech expert. We picked an industry expert. We picked an acquisition expert, the former Conservative Minister for Defence Procurement, Sir Jeremy Quinn. We chose a Treasury official because we wanted to make sure that we had the enemy inside the gate as we did the exercise, and that the DRT 6 assisted us. We then asked the public and organisations, think tanks, universities, for their views on 25 submissions, questions that we put out about the role, the nature of our allies, the people policy that we should have, etc. And we got 8,000 submissions into our review. We had to use artificial intelligence in order to sift them through, otherwise we'd still be reading it today. And then all of that information went into to the proposition review teams. So an assembly of about half a dozen to a dozen experts then looked at each one of these subjects, using all of that information that we had gleaned. The chair of these things then submitted an out paper with the conclusions of these groups, and then all of these were submitted to us and then were digested and have been edited down into these 100 and odd pages that will come out with the next couple of weeks. But it will represent probably the most consulted defence review that anybody has ever done anywhere. And it was a formidable exercise to do, but you have to do it. The world has changed out of all recognition. Even this morning, we don't know what President Trump is going to say when he wakens up in a couple of hours' time. We have no clue, but he can change the world with one decision and one tweet. And we live in that kind of world of instantaneous policy making. So the students of international relations, are in a dynamic situation, little knowing what surprise is going to be there the next moment. So we've now gone from discretionary interventions, limited interventions, that we planned for in 1998. That's the aircraft carriers, one of which sailed yesterday with the Prime Minister's blessing out to the Indo-Pacific, the HMS Prince of Wales. They were designed for a different era, but they will be used in a completely different context that I'll come on to in a moment. But the idea then was you go far, you hit hard, you stay long. That world has changed completely differently. We're now in an era of great power competition. The role of Russia, of China, of North Korea and Iran, either operating individually or collectively, have posed a new threat, a whole series of new challenges to the international order that we have all grown used to as well. And we're seeing actual conflict between nations. Vladimir Putin is making it absolutely clear that he is at war with the West. He makes no great pretense about the fact that he wants to see an end to NATO and to the European Union. And he's using physical means. The kinetic force of the military in Ukraine is on display. It's not theoretical anymore. It's not a possibility. It's real, it's actual, and it's horribly, horribly brutal. But he's also using the sub-threshold attack level. People talk about hybrid warfare and the grey zone and the rest of it, but it is there. It's cyber attacks, it's targeted assassinations, it's disinformation, it's election interference. That is ongoing on a systematic basis by our adversaries in the world today, and we need to be able to deal with that. So the import of our review is to, in some ways, recover the ability to fight wars and to win wars, because only if you have that ability can you deter any prospect of it happening. And we don't have that capability. Over the years, we've allowed our armed forces to become hollow. We've neglected them in terms of training, in terms of spare parts, in terms of equipment, because we didn't need them. They weren't necessary. I don't blame the last government or previous governments. It's a fact of life that is the way in which it is, and we have to deal with it as well. And that applies equally in the maritime field as well. When I did the review in 1998, we didn't think that we needed to deal with the homeland. In fact, I used to make speeches in NATO telling countries, you've got to be able to transport your forces. Having 2.5 million people in uniform in European NATO armies who couldn't travel outside of national boundaries, so you have to do something about that. You have to be involved in expeditionary warfare. Now, we've got to watch the homeland. This country, we always believed, had a moat round about it. The sea was there. It gave us a degree of protection, and it gave us a degree of distance from foreign threats. Not any longer. 90% of our data comes in underwater cables. 70% of our gas supplies in this country comes in one pipeline from Norway today. So undersea cables and undersea pipelines are of crucial importance to us, and yet they are a vulnerability that in the past we have probably neglected too much. So national resilience matters more now than it has done for a long time. So everyone knows, or most people know, what Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty is. An attack on one country is an attack on all countries. And I'm the only person ever to have invoked Article 5. Maybe I'll be the only person ever to invoke Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. But Article 3 of the treaty is little known, but is actually a fundamental part of the settlement that was the North Atlantic Treaty. Article 5 is an attack on one country, is an attack on all. Article 4 is we think we're going to be attacked and we are asking for help. Article 3 says basically you have a responsibility to look after your own country and it's your own defenses. So collective security is based on a collection of countries that themselves look after their own individual needs as well. And we're now going to have to start looking more carefully at what Article 5 means in terms of national defence for this country. So the North Atlantic Bastion, which is the role of the Royal Navy in this country, which is to look after the North Atlantic, the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap, these things which were sort of academic sort of subjects in the past have now become very real and very important as well. And even last night, Donald Trump made an announcement about opening up the concept of seabed mining. Something that has been sort of regarded as being off the agenda, unacceptable. But the President of the United States of America last night, just only last night, issued a tweet saying that they should now get involved in seabed mining for the rare earths that are going to be so important in the world. So the maritime world is faced with these problems of undersea cables and undersea pipelines. It's got the problem of piracy that has not gone away, was dealt with, but is still there, of the closure basically of the Suez Canal and the Red Sea because of the actions by the Houthis in Yemen, the problems of the South China Sea, the militarization of the fake islands in the South China Sea, and their militarization, Taiwan in the crosshairs of the Chinese administration, vulnerable as well. We also in the maritime field need to deal with the issues to do with the Arctic. You know, we've tended to sort of think the Arctic was an area that was really looked after internationally, demilitarized. It was seen as being an area benign. But pretty well every satellite in the world goes over the Arctic and the Arctic Circle. The Northern Sea Route is now open. China regards itself as an Arctic nation and an Atlantic nation because the Northern Sea Route with the melting ice now has become a navigable seaway, but under the control of the Russian Federation, who own most of the littoral along there as well. And the Russians are at the moment putting soft skin tankers with oil through the Northern Sea Route to China, an act of utter irresponsibility to anybody who knows anything about that area and the icebergs that can threaten the sea as well. But an area of huge importance to us and to the West in general. And we've seen, of course, what's happened in Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is not a great maritime nation, and indeed they've lost most of their maritime coastline. But the remarkable fact is that through innovation and tenacity and sheer guts, the Ukrainians, without a navy, have managed to almost completely destroy the Russian Black Sea fleet. And it's an extraordinary success story that I don't think that we've sufficiently recognized about how the mighty Russian Federation lost its flagship in the Black Sea and has now retreated, well off coast in order to protect what's left of that there. So the innovation being used by the Ukrainians at the moment is a lesson to all of us. And interestingly, because I think it's also of fascination to the maritime world, is that it is the Montreux Convention, a very old and ancient international treaty, allows the Turks and Turkey to control who gets into the Black Sea. And that is why the Russians have not been able to reinforce their navy, despite the damage that is being done to it by that, because the Montreux Convention means that Turkey stops any access to it. So on the surface, the maritime dimension is increasing and will have to be taken account of it. Underneath the sea, unmanned drones have had a devastating effect on the Russian Black Sea fleet, but are there as a potent threat and a danger to us as well. And if you look at the future, we've got the nuclear deterrent. Just down the road from here at Fastlane, Britain's independent nuclear deterrent is operated with 4 Trident submarines at sea, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The most useless form of defence that you can imagine, because they are designed never, ever to be used. But they are fundamental to the defence of our country, and maybe even to the whole of Europe as well. And frankly, inside the Kremlin, and I've been there on many occasions, the one thing that people in the Kremlin care about in terms of Britain's defence is not the size of the army, it's the ability of us to have an independent nuclear deterrent and therefore the thermonuclear missiles that are engaged with it as well. And that's an expensive component, makes up 20% of the British defence budget. But it's definitely the one thing that shifts the dial in the Kremlin. And if you now look at if I just give you a flavour of some of the things that we've been thinking about in the last few weeks. AUKUS, not sure whether people will recognise what AUKUS actually means. This plan for the Australians to have nuclear power submarines using American technology and British ingenuity as well to supply nuclear powered submarines for the Australian Navy, given the nature of the environment in which the Australians are. These submarines will be built in Barrow and Furness, and will be part of the Australian Defence Force, and a substantial part of that. So HMS Prince of Wales was waved off by the Prime Minister the other day, the aircraft carrier. But as I pointed out to the Prime Minister 2 weeks ago, one of the things that our review is going to emphasise is we need to stop thinking in terms of the army based on the number of troops in the army, the Royal Air Force on the basis of the number of planes that it actually has at the moment, and about the Royal Navy in terms of ships. I believe we're going to have 1,000-ship Navy, but they will not all be traditional grey painted warships. They will be completely different. The HMS Prince of Wales is not going to be an aircraft carrier. It's going to be a hybrid a strike force. It'll have oversea drones, overhead drones, undersea drones. It'll have F-35s on board, and it will also carry long-range strike missiles as well. It'll be a system, and it won't simply be a ship. And we've got to get away from the idea of thinking in the conventional way about the way in which we configure these things as well. So whether we are protecting the coastline of this country, whether we're thinking about protecting our undersea cables and our undersea pipelines, whether we're simply protecting the offshore energy turbines that are now populating our coast, we have to think in a completely different way. Anti-submarine warfare has become more than just an activity. It's become a science, and it is now a fundamental element of protecting the way of life that we have. We've grown over the years with the growth of our Navy and the power of our Navy to know how important it is for an island nation that depends on imports of food and pretty well everything else, how important the sea actually is. We've now got to move into that 21st century mode of thinking about how inventively and differently we're going to have to defend the country in the future. And hopefully that is what our Defence Review in a few weeks' time will be able to show you how it's done. Thank you very much.
We're going to have a break in a minute, but I just wonder if you'd be happy to take a few questions from the floor. So if anybody has any questions for Lord Robertson, please stick your hand up.
Well, I think it's multidimensional. I think that's the reality. The geopolitics have become complex in any event. So we need to think in more than just normal terms. I think in the introduction to the review, the bit that I wrote myself, I'd say that the international chessboard has been tipped over. The pieces were there before, and we knew what they were about. That doesn't exist now, because we can't see into the mind of Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping. We certainly can't see into the mind of Donald Trump when he wakens up, in a couple of hours' time. So we have to be able to deal with a lot of these areas. So if the army is going to have to reconfigure in a world where your drones can spot the enemy ahead of it and reconfigure itself, then in the Navy we have to do the same thing.
Sorry, forgive me. So just for context, I think when a ship owner has a question of is a ship British, for example, 2 weeks ago I was working in Taiwan. I was on a Belgian flagged vessel as a UK national, working for a Taiwanese client with a Dutch crew, building wind farms in the Dutch sector. And we had obviously the blockades recently with the PLAN around the vessel, and my agency sent out a contractor before me, and when I sat down and spoke to the captain, he said, "Oh, nice to meet you. The first thing your predecessor said was, if you insult the Prophet Muhammad, I will kill you." And that's why I got the job. So these are the sort of security issues. I mean, when we have
you were the assassin, were you?
Yeah. So the idea of a nation state and a nationality of a vessel now is a really tricky question. And my question is there a danger of, as you say, having an old-fashioned idea of a nation state when in the globalized sort of maritime world, a vessel can change its flag with a phone call. Is the defence reviewer or your position, are you considering what nationality means in terms of shipping and UK ship register?
No, well, not really. No, we can't, because I think that'd be a bit beyond our remit. But what we can do is to say that the freedom of navigation is an important concept internationally. And that is why, irrespective of who owns ships here or there, there are essential principles at stake. The International Law of the Sea Convention, hasn't been signed by the Americans or by the Chinese or the Russians, but we assume that there are certain standards that are there, and where you can defend open sea lanes, then it will be done. Not just in the interests of individual nations, but in the interests of global trade.
Given that we can't see into Trump's mind, and the historical level of control that the United States has had over our nuclear deterrent, what level of control do you see the United Kingdom having over our always at sea nuclear deterrent going forward?
We have total control of it. We take the missiles from a common pool, but the moment the missiles are on the submarine, then it's under the control of the British Prime Minister and nobody else. We don't rely on America for targeting. We don't rely on America for anything apart from that. So it is conceivable that they could stop us from accessing the common stock of missiles, but the missiles are already on the submarine, so they would be there for a long time. But I can assure you, I started my political life demonstrating against the arrival of American nuclear submarines in the Clyde. Ian Gow and I came from the town called Dunoon, on the Clyde, and I remember carrying a banner saying "Ban the bomb," and that's still my aspiration. I still would like to see a world without these terrible, terrible weapons to do with that. But in the meantime, we have an independent nuclear deterrent, which is unlike all of the others, allocated to NATO. But it is completely independent. It is absolutely inside the control of the British Prime Minister.
Hi, I'm studying here doing my chief mates. So I'm a current merchant seafarer working at sea. I work for a British company on a so-called strategic ship. And it's a question relating to your comment about how we need to move away from conventional thinking in acts of war. So with this new defence review, where do the merchant seafarers come into it?
Well, we're focusing on the Royal Navy. But the freedom of navigation applies to the merchant navy as well, and the fleet support that's involved as well. And you've got this stuffed principle, ships taken up from trade, so that in the case of a war, you can then commandeer ships. And so it might be, there are some people who say that this principle should apply to airfields, and it should apply to transport, domestically as well. And maybe as we talk more about national resilience, these concepts have got to come in. But again, freedom of navigation and making the seas safer for the merchant navy is part and parcel of the role of Britain's Royal Navy.
Are we still considered as part of the overall plan if we were to go to war?
Absolutely. The Navy is central. It is the senior service. It comes before all the others. So it is absolutely involved. Continuous at sea deterrence with the independent nuclear deterrent is there, but the rest of the fleet is also part and parcel. The HMS Prince of Wales is there with other NATO ships. So this is not just one ship, one aircraft carrier. It's part of a whole system of manned and unmanned and autonomous, as well as grey warships as well.
Considering the importance of choke points, especially maritime choke points like Singapore or Suez Canal, what does the UK have to defend such choke points except soft power? I mean, they don't seem to really have strategically placed navy that can actually really act in, for example, Singapore and places like that, and they seem to more rely on alliances and things like that.
Well, it has to be done through alliances. Individual countries, especially countries like ours, can't themselves deal with the kind of problems that are being faced in the Red Sea. The Houthis, are using ballistic missiles. I was on board the Prince of Wales a couple of weeks ago, and the young guy, individual on a screen, had 2.5 minutes, from the launch of a ballistic missile, to warn the rest of the ship. I said, have you got some panic button? And he said, no, I've got a whistle. It's the most elaborate, most technologically advanced method of tracking, the ballistic missiles, and you have the primitive use of a whistle there to do it. So the Prince of Wales is going to be in the Red Sea, very, very shortly. But alliances are the way in which we will fight wars in the future. This country will never be involved in another sort of Falklands or another individual thing. It'll all be done through alliances. We spoke to the commander of American forces in the Pacific, COM Indo-Pac. Now he's got 6 carrier battle groups, and about 300, I don't know, about 3,000 fast jets. So a lot of that power is being deployed in order to keep sea lanes open. But they're part and parcel of alliances in that region, just as we're part and parcel of the NATO alliance as well.
Ian Gow has the last question for this session.
Thank you. Wonderful talk, Lord Robertson. I'm principally interested, of course, in the Asia-Pacific or the Indo-Pacific. And I'm struck by the fact that there's so much talk about China, etc., but Putin is going to come for the Northern Islands, the Northern Territories, etc. And since Putin, who I think is a reincarnation of Rasputin, actually, but that basically the Koreans, the Koreans, of course, in Europe, in Ukraine, are being used almost as cannon fodder, but they do have elite officers there that are learning so much about ground and all the other things that are involved. But there's a distinct possibility that, leaving aside their defeat in the Black Sea, with the Black Sea Fleet, there's a distinct possibility that Korea and Russia will join forces in terms of maritime power to take on the Northern Territories, etc. Is that something that you are aware of? And I'm just concerned that we keep talking about China and we keep talking about North Korea, but Russia and North Korea have now got a corridor for learning about, if you like, maritime security or maritime disruption.
But China's now got a route through the Northern Sea route to the Atlantic. So we never saw, we never really thought about China as being an Atlantic nation. We now have to start thinking in these terms, so that the Arctic has now attained a strategic importance that previously it didn't have. It was demilitarized. It was regarded as, because it involves Canada and America as well, as being, out with. It was almost neutral territory, commanded by treaties. I don't think we can take that for granted anymore. The Coast Guard in Russia is run by the FSB, the successors to the KGB. And that's an interesting, fact that most people don't really know about, but it's seen as part of the internal security of the Russian Federation. And we'll have to pay much more attention to the Arctic and what it means in terms of broader geopolitical significance.
I'm sorry, perhaps I didn't explain it clearly enough. I'm talking about the Northern Territories, where a disputed territory between Russia and Japan. And all I'm saying is that the disruptive power there, when Russia finally decides to move back in again on those islands, etc., and all those sea resources and fishing and everything else returns, that there's a danger that they may actually pass on knowledge, a considerable amount of knowledge, to the North Koreans in that area to disrupt.
No, it's a valid point, because it's quite clear that in exchange for the cannon fodder of North Korean troops, Russia is giving North Korea technological information that they desperately need. I remember in the good old days when I was dealing with Vladimir Putin, they hated the North Koreans. They regarded them as sort of subhuman and a pretty disgraceful sort of regime. But now, uncomfortable bedfellows they may be, but they're certainly still in the bed. And I think one of the things that we have to be conscious of in the world is that Chinese technology is now proliferating. So in the future, if you have a sort of great power competition, Chinese technology is going to be facing us wherever we are in the world, and that's a new dimension that we hadn't actually bargained for in the past.
Lord Robertson, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for the questions. You've now earned tea and coffee, if you'd like it, and we're going to reassemble for the first panel at 11:25.